Hi, I'm Jim O'Shaughnessy, and welcome to Infinite Loops. Sometimes we get caught up in what feel like infinite loops when trying to figure things out. Markets go up and down, research is presented and then refuted, and we find ourselves right back where we started. The goal of this podcast is to learn how we can reset our thinking on issues that hopefully leaves us with a better understanding as to why we think the way we think and how we might be able to change that to avoid going in infinite loops of thought. We hope to offer our listeners a fresh perspective on a variety of issues and look at them through a multifaceted lens, including history, philosophy, art, science, linguistics, and yes, also through quantitative analysis. And through these discussions, help you not only become a better investor, but also become a more nuanced thinker. With each episode, we hope to bring you along with us as we learn together. Thanks for joining us. Now please enjoy this episode of Infinite Loops.
Jim O'Shaughnessy is Chairman and Co-Chief Investment Officer of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management, where Jamie Catherwood is an associate. All opinions expressed by Jim, Jamie, and podcast guests are solely their own opinions and do not reflect the opinions of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management. This podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be relied upon as a basis for investment decisions. Clients of O'Shaughnessy Asset Management may maintain positions in the securities discussed in this podcast.
Well, hello, everyone. It's Jim O'Shaughnessy with my colleague Jamie Catherwood for another edition of Infinite Loops. Today, I am delighted to be joined by Massimo Marinelli, Aser Ventures Executive Board Member and Leeds United Board Member. Massimo, welcome.
Thank you.
Jamie, since you are the axe here, I'm going to let you start.
Because we're a finance podcast, I think before we get into the sports side of your career, it would be very interesting to hear about the pre-Aser Ventures portion of your career and your time in New York. And from there, we can go into Leeds and everything.
Yeah, look, I mean, they're very tied anyways. I now work for Aser, as you guys mentioned, which is an investment company in sports, but my background is very much that one of a financier. And that's, still my responsibility really here is around strategic investment opportunities and signing partnerships, making investments and things like that, which is what ultimately Aser wants to do as well. In terms of myself, I started as an investment banker. I was between London and New York, 15, 16 years, focused on media and entertainment. Amongst media, we included sports, given that at the end of the day, the revenue lines of sports properties is very much tied to media revenues, entertainment, ticketing, and the likes. And so, during my career, whether it was in New York or in London, I was doing deals for the likes of Comcast, Viacom, Sky, but also Formula One, MotoGP. And I also saw the previous business of the founder of Aser, Andrea Radrizzani, who is in his late 20s, 30s, built a very successful sports rights media agency from zero to almost $1 billion of revenues. At UBS, where I advised them on monetizing that investment. And basically on the back of that monetization, Aser Ventures was launched.
I'm fascinated by the economics of sports. Jimmy and I were chatting before you joined us. Many of our listeners are Americans, so they're going to probably be able to understand it from the point of view of the NFL and how they contrast. And I know that you just acquired an interest in the San Francisco 49ers, right?
No, it's the other way around. The 49ers invested in Leeds United.
That's even cooler.
Yeah, it's 49ers Enterprises, an entity associated with the York family that controls, the 49ers.
So I have a couple of questions. The first is, again, for a novice, why a team in Yorkshire, not London? I hear there might be an interesting story about that. And then if you could maybe take us through how the investment risks differ between a premier sports club in Europe versus the NFL, for example.
I'm happy to answer that, taking a step back and say, looking at a soccer or sports professional team investments, you can either look at opportunities that have got a significant equity increase potential, which is what we saw in Leeds United. It was a great franchise, but had been in the second division for a long time, still a significant supporter base, one city club, a lot of opportunities to really develop the stadium and things like that. So we saw, that opportunity to invest at one and potentially have an asset that was going to be worth multiple times in a short period of time. So let's say, significant option equity value. Or instead, you can look at opportunities that are a little bit more potentially yielding a stable return. There are clubs that are managed more as a way to develop players and maybe monetize their players and perhaps reinvest those proceeds into the sports, into the business or other initiatives. Clearly, in Leeds United, it was very much the former. As I was saying, it was a club that was really a sleeping giant. It sounds like you heard a little bit of the story of how, Andrea got involved with this club. But basically, having been in football for a long time, although more as a kind of monetization, looking at the broadcast right side of things, clearly knew football very well and a lot of clubs and a lot of leagues. And initially, started looking at opportunities in Italy or Spain or France. However, a chance encounter with Kenny Dalglish, one of the most revered figures, I think, in British football. He mentioned Leeds United as a potential opportunity. Funnily enough, it happened to be owned by another Italian like us, and the rest is history, I guess. We basically, first acquired 50% and then, 100% full control. And that was in 2017, basically. And on the back of it, we started to execute that strategy of really renovating the whole culture, hiring new management, both on the football side and on the business side, commercial side. Also added an important partner like the 49ers in 2 transactions, and basically managed to bring it up to the Premier League, which is a top division in British football, within 3 years. Successfully closed the first year in the Premier League last year, but we're still into very much the beginning phase of that investment in a sense. We obviously need to continue to develop the club, and the first couple of years are also very much years of consolidation, making sure that you can maintain that position in the Premier League. That's going to be the focus for us, certainly for the year that is coming up, and building on from there. I think very much, so far we've been lucky enough, fortunate enough to be able to realize that upside potential, but we certainly need to continue to invest in it and continue to develop the franchise.
It might be helpful for our American listeners who might not be familiar with the kind of tiered system of English football, where you have the Premier League, Championship, which is the second division, and then fourth divisions, and the kind of monetary implications of going in and out of those leagues. So from a financial standpoint, could you just kind of talk about how significant getting promoted back into the Premier League can be for a club's finances?
Yeah, absolutely. The key point ultimately is there is more risk into investing in a European sports franchise than there is in a professional sports team, where there are a finite amount of clubs that you can buy. Probably that's also true in European opportunities or world opportunities in terms of franchises with a lot of following. But on the other hand, here there is a system of promotion and relegation where every year, each team goes into a league and needs to perform to preserve the position in the league they're in. If you are in the top league, or if you are in the lower division, like the Championship you just mentioned, try and obtain that promotion to the Premier League. To give you an idea, the key difference obviously is about revenue potential. If you are in the Championship, you got very limited revenues from media rights, without being too specifics. But I think you're looking at a 10 times plus revenue upside from going from the lower division to the top division, between a combination of fixed fees and other fees that you can get by playing in the top division. So obviously for us, being promoted was a significant coup. And that's true in other professional sports league in Europe, where there is always that risk. You always come in, even if you are the top club every year, you start from 0 points like everybody else, and you need to make the points to preserve that position. So clearly there is more risk, and it's down to the nature of how these sports organizations were born. In the past, they didn't even used to be a limited company or Inc., right? They used to be association. Professionalization of sports has happened in part, and that's why now you have limited company, also club listed in stock exchanges like Man United or Juventus, to name a couple. But of course, you need to keep in mind that there is that sporting performance that could significantly impact your revenue opportunity.
So it sounds to me like there's more of an arbitrage opportunity in European teams than, say, in NFL, if you always start from zero.
For sure. I mean, obviously, the good news of being an NFL team owner is that you kind of know pretty much you got a very, very solid base of revenues year in, year out. If you are the last one in the league, you obviously have the opportunity to pick up the best potential talent that is coming out, right, with the draft concept. These things don't exist here. You basically go in, perform, need to make revenues, use those revenues to invest. Obviously, you can develop your own talent, which all good clubs do. They have their own academy. One of the things we did as a owner of Leeds United was also to reinvest into the academy and very much bring the academy. I mean, this is a little bit specific, but our academy didn't used to be top level academy. It now is what is called a category 1 academy, meaning that we can compete with the top youth teams and continue to develop talent. And of course, developing talent is also a great way to realize new asset value potential. Great example for us is obviously Calvin Phillips, the national team member during the last Euro, came through the whole academy system in Leeds United. Now is a player that after the first year playing in the Premier League, effectively played every minute that counted for England during the European competition. And we got, obviously there were other examples in the past, but that's why investing into the academy is also very important for a professional sports owner.
And again, it sounds to me like you also have a much bigger pool to choose from, right, than say an NFL team. Is there a process that you use for scouting talent?
We have our scouts. And so obviously there is a good scout component. It's led by Director of Football, Victor Horta for Leeds United. He has his teams that basically is constantly looking at players, whether it's in England or outside of England, depending obviously on age. Of course, if you look at teenagers, you're looking into the local area. But if you look at Premier League players, you have to look also outside of your current area. From that perspective, it's becoming a lot more interesting in terms of the use of analytics, AI, technologies to try and understand who could be the next Messi or Ronaldo.
An interesting question for me, I guess, would also be, you're drawing from very different cultures, very different European cultures. Does that make it more difficult when you're working on the cohesiveness of the team, or is that not an issue?
It's a good question. I mean, it's probably, more a sporting question, a business question. I mean, I obviously don't get as involved with the composition of the team per se, but certainly what I would say is that it's very important to have a manager that builds that cohesive culture. And I think, in Marcelo Bielsa and Leeds United, that's exactly who we had, right? We had somebody that basically, took a team that was already in existence, added a few players over the years, and effectively built a very, very successful squad. And there are many, many examples of these. I think we are one of them. Effectively, when Marcelo took the team, the squad was by far and large very similar to the one that he got to third in his first year, but arrived 13th in the league the previous year. And in the second year under Marcelo, won the championship as first by 10 points or so. So obviously, was a very successful building of a team. There are many examples. I mean, I can mention even, the national team examples very recent of Italy. Obviously, I'd be biased because I'm Italian, but Mancini, he took a team that did not qualify for the World Cup and effectively in 3 years won the European Championship. So I think you can definitely see that building that cohesion in the team is going to be very, very important. And that's where, as a professional sports owner, you need to be able to address and understand who can be the guy in charge of it. Sometimes it's something that you have in-house, or sometimes you need to hire the right people. That's definitely something you have to keep in mind. I mean, in our case, we definitely look at increasing those capabilities with the addition of new members of the management team, like already added Victor, Marcelo, and the likes.
How has it been managing from a business and financial perspective? So you get promoted, obviously, first time in 16 years. My dad called me crying from the car after he finished watching the game and it finally happened. But then you come in during a season where there are, for most of the season, no fans allowed in the stadium, so no match day revenue. How just difficult was that to manage, and how did you guys handle the COVID crisis from a financial perspective? And you must be very excited about this season with full capacity coming back again.
Fingers crossed, obviously, because that's the rules say now. Who knows what will be in a month's time? We shall see. But indeed, we obviously had to go through that, particularly when COVID started. We were basically lucky enough to have a supporting team that helped us, address the cash flow concern in the short term, which was definitely a good way for us. We basically managed to agree with the teams to delay some of the salary, which is obviously the biggest component of cost for a professional sports team. And as we went up, of course, we look at a significantly higher revenue base, as I was mentioning before. But we had to be, indeed, as you say, very, very careful. And to be fair, the first year for us was not a year of lots of cash flow out of the club. In fact, we invested everything we got and more to make sure that we had a competitive squad and that the team was well looked after, continue to upgrade the facilities and do everything right. We also had to upgrade facilities for the stadium because obviously we had higher requirements for production that is required as a Premier League club rather than a Championship club. So there was a lot of investments we had to make. And definitely, I would say the good news of professional sports, but that is true of Formula One or any leagues, is that you got very high visibility at the beginning of every year, because typically you have a long-term contract, whether it's media rights or commercial revenues. And even ticketing obviously was missing during COVID, but you got certain visibility in terms of what sort of revenues you might get. So you need to manage that vis-a-vis the cost structure, which is also relatively fixed. So you just need to really set that at the beginning. It requires a lot of work, let's say, in between seasons, particularly as you start thinking, which is also different from professional sports team. Here we have the transfer window where you can buy and sell players, something that doesn't happen in professional sports in the US, where you just exchange players or you have the draft system. And obviously you need to put that into the equation of how you're going to buy the next midfielder or the next keeper, whatever it is that you're looking to invest in within the team. It is similar to a traditional business, but on the other hand, different, given that you're very dependent on what are the sporting requirements and what is currently the team is strong or needs more support.
I'm interested in the fixed versus variable costs, because that sounds a lot different than we're facing here in the US. For example, with the NFL, I mean, are you zero-based budgeting? How are you dealing with that successfully?
In a sense, you could argue it's zero-based budgeting. Obviously, we know every year, what is the pool of salaries that we pay. And obviously that's at least fixed cost based, but typically there are performance bonuses depending on how the team is performing and whether players play, scores or whatever. So that's very high fixed cost, but with some variable on top. We also obviously have a very strong visibility in terms of the organization, what is required, host the team for home games or arrange to play in other cities whenever it is. We definitely have the part that is perhaps a little bit more variable, which is down to how many e-commerce or merchandise we might sell, how much hospitality, how much revenues we might make in the stadium, which obviously was not much last year for obvious reasons. And that's where there is a little bit more variability, perhaps.
So the merchandising, and I'm fascinated by that because it seems to be the way things are moving, and not only sports and things like music, etc. The ability to get media rights, merchandising rights. Can you keep that going? Even like it sounds like you did through COVID, which is a pretty amazing.
Yeah, we did. I mean, obviously, kudos to our commercial teams there, but I guess helped perhaps by having been back in the Premier League. But we did very well in merchandising, particularly in e-commerce. For a lot of time, we also had shops closed. We do have shops in Leeds. We got 3-4 shops where supporters can go in the stadium, in the city center, at the airport. But of course, we had to keep them closed during COVID for a long period of time. But still, performing on the pitch is a way to continue to maintain that appetite from supporters to continue to be involved.
And how much of a symbiotic relationship is there between, let's say you get a superstar and he's got his own endorsements and everything else. How much does that help you on your merchandising side?
I think, there are obviously examples there that says that it does, and it does successfully. I mean, when I think one, not necessarily tied to merchandise, but when Juventus bought Ronaldo, I think he saw a migration of fans on social media platforms from Real Madrid to Juventus. So I think it's one thing you have to consider these days, particularly social media.
Of Juventus and endorsements, I guess, but also image rights. I'm a Tottenham fan, much to Tom, your colleague's chagrin as an Arsenal supporter. But I know that I was very excited, I guess, 2 transfer windows ago when it seemed like everything was done on a deal for Pablo Dybala. And then the whole deal collapsed because of image rights, because some third party owned his rights from when he was younger. And it was like 20 million buyout or something crazy. Is that common in continental Europe, that kind of image rights and those issues from a management perspective, or?
I think for the superstar, it's definitely a consideration. There are companies that you guys would have seen, particularly in the US and starting to expand also here in Europe, that are looking to potentially invest into the revenue potential of sports fund and effectively, guarantee an upfront ticket in exchange for a percentage of their earnings. There are some regulatory constraints you need to keep in mind, because there is no third-party ownership of players allowed in European football list. And so, you always need to understand what is possible and what is not. Image rights was a way that I think in the past people have done some of these investments. I would say, that is very relevant for the big superstars, and there are not many of them for which, they're particularly relevant. So as football continues to grow, as the importance of social media, I think, would allow people to better realize and have engagement with sports team and players, that would be a more important piece of the pie. But I think, it's an opportunity for everybody. Sports in general, we think, is a sector with a secular growth prospects, with a lot of opportunities that are still underutilized. And where, frankly, though there has been some professionalization, there is still a lot more to do. Coming into sports of institutional investors is definitely welcome from that perspective.
Could you talk a bit about Aser's relationship with the 49ers Enterprises and the deal that was the 37% stake and that deal from a few months ago in the spring, but just kind of what Aser's relationship is and what the kind of synergies you guys hope to bring about from that new acquisition or deal?
First of all, I would say, we are extremely pleased and proud to have the 49ers as the 49ers Enterprises, so the entity associated with the York family, as a shareholder in Leeds United. Of course, they are one of, if not the top professional sports team in the world, right, in the NFL. They invested in two separate transactions, so they do have a 37% stake, and that came through two separate transactions. The partnership is a constant dialogue with them in terms of how to improve and grow the opportunities for the club. We obviously have a very strong presence in Europe. We also have presence through Aser and our other assets in the US and in Asia and the rest of the world. But they have such a strong track record. They built a new stadium recently. They obviously know very well how to sweat merchandise and retail and ticketing. And so we look constantly how to take those learnings and implement them in Europe, adjusting them for the local cultural needs. And so I'd say it's a constant dialogue, daily basis. We speak. We look at what is required, what can they do, utilize their analytical input into the club, and build on that. Particularly, I would say at the moment on the commercial side, eventually, perhaps also see what can be done in terms of sporting, not necessarily, obviously, of course, we play two different sports, but how you can maintain that sort of performance aspects of it.
I was going to ask if, because with Spurs, when we built our new stadium, the pitch there's two pitches, one for obviously Tottenham matches, football pitch, soccer pitch, I'll differ in this case, but then that pitch retracts and then an American football field slides out in its place. And the idea is that Tottenham have announced like a partnership with the NFL, and now the NFL matches in London that used to be played at Wembley will be played at and have been played at Tottenham Stadium. And there's that kind of relationship. Is that something that the 49ers and Leeds might pursue now as well? Something where like 49ers games in London will be played at Ellen Road, and that is kind of another way to get some overlap in interests?
I don't think the Ellen Road Stadium would be, I don't know, to be fair, whether the Ellen Road Stadium would be a good stadium for an NFL game, but you're right. That's been happening, obviously, in European football teams. I think it's more about learning how to control the performance of the teams, whether it's injuries, who's going through more fatigue, how to maintain that sort of winning and performance culture rather than, necessarily having teams play on each other's pitch. But that could definitely happen in due course. I think we will see more of that. I think it's very interesting, obviously, to see the NFL teams coming over, the NBA teams coming over, perhaps even more sports. And for us, vice versa, to build perhaps, more of a presence of Leeds United in the US and other markets. We got strong recognition in certain markets, particularly in the Nordics and in Australia, perhaps, two I would mention. But there is always more to do. And even if you move beyond football, definitely, for example, the way that Formula One has been building out, I think. So, obviously there are examples that show that creating that sort of a content interest, it's key to preserve the importance of the sports franchises. At the end of the day, we are an entertainment business. We need to, continue to entertain, create interest, engage fans, and have fans that continue to return, want to be involved with us, want to come to the stadium, want to wear the right T-shirt, and so on and so forth.
One of the things that I'm interested in, knowing your background in emerging markets and how well you did there, did you borrow your learnings there for application here? And if you could talk a little bit about your investment horizon for this particular investment, is there an exit strategy or no? I'm very interested to see how that symbiotically might go together.
We're definitely trying to apply any learnings in everything we do. We are not a financial investor per se. Rather, we see ourselves as a management team, spearheaded by Andrea and other members of the management team, be that Mark Watson, that used to run BT Sports, Graham Wallace, that used to be at Man City and other clubs and media companies, and basically use that expertise to then better sweat the investments we make. For that same reasons, we don't necessarily have an exit horizon. We also don't have a stage that we invest in. We've done anything from seed to launching our own businesses to invest in a business like Leeds United that is 100 years plus of history. We rather see what are the opportunities out there where we can add value with the capabilities that we got, wherever we got them, be that Asia or US, and continue to build and create asset value. That's really the goal of Aser. That is true for Leeds, it's true for 11 Sports, which is our other, I would say, flagship property that we launched 5-6 years ago, very focused on monetization of sports rights and entertainment rights more broadly, but also We're Live Now, which is the business we launched last year, which is more of a pay-per-view platform focused on entertainment and lifestyle.
Interesting. And one of the areas where I see a lot of crossover between my interests and yours is in sports analytics. We're quants. So can you talk a little bit about how helpful that has been to your process?
It's definitely, an area where we spend more and more time. And, the scouting team we were talking about before have access to all the right tools and more. Some tools I probably don't even know that they use, but sometimes I find out I'm looking at these companies, we partner with Leeds United. So it's definitely a key component of how scouts look at our performance these days and select players. The work from that perspective has changed. It's not anymore these are that guy presenting these are that player, but it's very much us selecting the type of players that we want for the type of football you want to play and the needs that you have. But more broadly, if I go back into more the business side, as Aser, we look at sports, analytics, and more broadly data as a key component of the things that we do. We invested as a seed investment that we made in a company called Sports Data Labs, which is very much playing in that space. In that case, they created some very original and exciting IP in collecting human data from athletes, but obviously could be also from any sort of human. And how you can then make sure that you get that real data, use that data in the best possible way, be that to preserve injuries or, so, there's obviously a, let's say, health application, but also performance application, and perhaps even, tomorrow creating more data for betting purposes or things like that. So data is definitely at the core of what we do, and we will continue to invest in it.
In the US, of course, the very famous story was Moneyball. And there was a huge reticence on the part of the old school scouts to even look at it, much less put it into use. Obviously, that created an asymmetric opportunity for him, and we all know what he went on to do. Are the younger generation of scouts just very comfortable with the data, or are you finding that you need to cajole them a little bit?
My sense is definitely they are. There's obviously now access to tools that did not exist 10, 15, 20 years ago. And now you want to know of a player, you don't need to watch the Euros. You can go on certain platforms, look up the player and see, every time he's hitting with the right foot, every time he's hitting with the left foot, header or whatever. So definitely there has been a change from that perspective. And I think that's a key component of how professional sports teams run their sporting division these days. On the other hand, we're a human being, we're a human organization, and the culture is very important in sports. We were talking about the importance of teams, how teams need to be cohesive. You cannot just look at individuals on their own. You also need to think how those individuals are going to perform. It's also true when we look at football clubs opportunities. It's not as simple as looking at the P&L and cash flow statement. It's also important to understand what is the opportunity around the city, what the fans think, how you can engage with them, what are the local dynamics are, where is the position of the stadium relative to the cities, how you can improve those opportunities. So it's obviously an area that you need to continue to analyze, though you cannot necessarily analyze always with data, but assess very, very carefully.
And it seems to me also that in listening to you, that there is an opportunity which is still very much present in terms of the arbitrage opportunities between, say, operating in the United States, operating in Central Europe. Does that go to the rest of the world as well? Is your company looking for opportunities where you might even be able to have a bigger impact?
At Aser, we definitely have presence around the world. We look at opportunities in any continent, really. We're obviously more present in Europe, US, and Asia. We probably should differentiate also between whether it's a media entertainment opportunity versus is a sports opportunities. Is down to size and comfort, but I think as we look forward and look at the sector, there will be a lot more opportunities any continent, be it Africa or also Australia. Oceania. I mean, there has been definitely, a lot of good examples there. There have been investments coming from top investors in the broader, economy, and so they will continue to do more. If we go back to football, there is obviously the example of Citigroup that has made investments in football clubs, be that in India or US or Europe. Probably, that's not for us just yet. But never say never. As an investor, as you know, you always need to keep your eyes open for what is the next trend. But as a group, as Aser, we definitely do not tie our eyes onto Europe at all. And in fact, we recently made a relatively big acquisition for us via 11 Sports in the US, with which we bought a company called Team Whistle.
Interesting. So I'm also interested in the crossover learnings, because I think often you can learn even more if you're looking at different ways of investing. And this certainly seems very intriguing to me. So what have you learned from your experience here that you apply elsewhere in your investments?
So one of the areas that has been very, very important for us as an investor has been always to make sure that we look at how we can be a little bit more innovative in the commercial revenue piece. I think one area that we typically find is, I'm not talking necessarily about Leeds United or 11, but in general, when I look at opportunities, it's very easy to get comfort with what you already know and how you let's say the low-hanging fruits around you. And instead, we very much look at what else can you build that maybe does not reap benefits today, but definitely build the franchise asset value tomorrow. And so I think it's very important to keep those eyes for opportunities that are not necessarily short-term in nature and how you can realize revenues. Obviously, there is also a budget constraint at times. It's very nice to build, a new CRM system. If you don't build a new CRM system, you may not be able to understand where your fund base is developing and where you're losing funds and how you can continue to build that fund base. So from my perspective, one area that we saw is continue to invest into the long-term future of these opportunities. I think that's true from the previous asset that Andrea used to run. That was, a sports rights agency, very much looking at building out outside of the mainstream sports into new sports. You could argue the same is true for esports, for example, an area that obviously has been growing very, very fast. And I think we continue to be an important component of the entertainment landscape.
What do you think emerging opportunities for investment in both sports and media are today? If you're thinking more about that long-term future prospects, where are the emerging opportunities for those today?
On our side, we actually have a lot of focus on to what is services, agencies for the rights order space and the broader, world of rights order. So we made recently an investment in a company called Creed Media, which is a digital media agency focused on developing influencer presence and on music space in particular, or brand partnership for sponsors and the likes. Within that space, we require more and more attention for rights order to maintain that engagement with a broader fan base. So actually, although it might be seen a little bit as old school sector, the agency piece, but actually, we think there is a lot to be done. Similar in terms of content creation, we did a documentary for Leeds United a couple of years ago that was very successful. We're doing a couple more now with top properties we are developing as we speak. There are other examples in the world of football, whether it is, the All or Nothing, I think is called franchise that Amazon developed with professional sports team here in Europe, or the Formula One or the Michael Jordan one that may be familiar to the US audience. They were, I believe, on Netflix or ESPN Plus.
You guys were like the first movers in Amazon, weren't you?
Yeah, we were definitely one of the first, and that sort of ability to offer new services that rights holders are not really exploiting, that however can be very, very useful to create new revenues and to increase engagement, which is what you need. But more broadly, data analytics already discussed, esports is another area, create new IP in the space. There have been some successful launch of new franchises. If you think of the recent past, some of them have gone super big, like UFC or One Championship or Formula E. So how can you create this next area of interest for people? And now you can monetize those. And obviously, OTT is an interesting space from that perspective because it allows you to have access to run more content that you could have done through traditional technology in the past. You only had a certain finite amount of broadcast channels, but you can broadcast via OTT any game you want. And that's, for example, what we do with 11 Sports when we acquired what is now 11sports.com. Previously, my Cujo, we focus very much on second tier football leagues and, make sure that people can access them from around the world. Or similarly, you can think of how you can create content that is available, whether it's OTT or through traditional distribution, that is very engaging for young audiences. So utilizing social media platforms and the likes, or indeed, offer the opportunity to access content on a more of a pay-as-you-go basis. I think that's another underexplored area of content because, a lot of people are happy to pay subscription and true fans want to watch every game. Some other people might just want to watch the odd game or the odd event, and how you make sure that those guys are as well served as the guys that are 100% fans that want to watch every single game. Because ultimately we think, there is an underexplored area for the more occasional fans in sports or for the events that before, were not accessible unless you were there. And particularly with COVID, it became very clear that like we did for the Studio 54 Dua Lipa concert and stream it worldwide in a short period of time.
What kind of contrast are you seeing between what I would call a super fan, somebody who wants to see every game, and the occasional fan that you've just been talking about?
Look, we love them both, and they're both super, super important. But, it's just a matter of life. Obviously, some people prefer some other things. We need to continue to build out the fan base. The super fans is work out for with everything he wants and constant content, constant access to behind the scenes, new games, new gamification opportunities, or opportunity to interact with his fans. And also make sure the more occasional fans feels like he's not left over, because ultimately, people also swap, right? He swaps also depending on what stage of your life you're in, whether or not you can go to the stadium. If, for me, I have 2 young kids, it's a bit more difficult than it was when I was a 20-something-year-old guy. So, there are obviously things that is also a cycle of life that might mean that you have to prioritize different things a certain period of time. So we also need to recognize that and make sure that we preserve the engagement throughout the life cycle of the fan base.
I'm curious what you thought of the acquisition from Ryan Reynolds and the other actor whose name I'm forgetting of, I think it was Wrexham Football Club, which is, I think, tier 2 or tier 3 tiny team. And they basically acquired it with the intention of doing content and putting out a series similar to the one you did for Amazon, but the all or nothings as well. And I'm curious if you think that that's going to become a more kind of dominant trend where people with huge followings like a Ryan Reynolds get involved in sports and then use their own brand and influence to produce content that people will want to watch.
The ability to have a good storytelling around a club is going to be key for the success of a sports franchise. That is perhaps a very extreme example, given they're not necessarily going to be attracting people with the quality, at least at the beginning of the gates. Having said that, I never saw them play, so I don't want to make statements that I'm not really qualified.
We have a lot of Wrexham fans that listen to this podcast.
In general, I would say, of course, you watch Premier League or you watch Championship because you're going to see a good game. That's why people like to watch the top sporting competition. On the other hand, there is an awful lot that goes on behind the scene, and creating a nice storytelling behind it is going to be key to preserve that interest. And I think that's what we did with Take Us Home. Club de Cuervo, I think, was another example. I'm not necessarily as familiar with that one, but I certainly heard, this football team in Mexico that effectively built a Netflix show around how to create a football team. And I think for a professional sports franchise, it's going to be very important to have a constant content access during preseason, during the season, after the season, just maintaining the dialogue. social media platforms can be very useful for that, but it's not as easy to understand what's going on. And so we are also experimenting. One of the other businesses we invested in is a company called Epico that is exactly looking at creating more social media type content for professional sports team. So probably akin to what the example you just mentioned of Ryan Reynolds. I think we will watch it with interest, and I think it'd be an interesting learning curve. But there are a lot of personalities, let me say, that continue to look at sports as an investment opportunity, and a lot of successful sports entrepreneurs that have launched their own studio properties, right? LeBron James, I think, is obviously a clear example. So from that perspective, it's going to be super interesting to see that world develop. And at the end of the day, it confirms what I was saying before. This is a sector with secular growth prospects. It's going to be important for more institutional investors to get comfortable with it and understand where are the upsides, what are the downsides, what are the dynamics, because ultimately that would be beneficial to the sports industry. One area that, of course, we continue to push is to make sure that the sports industry is sustainable. We don't want to have clubs that go bust as it happens, or that suddenly go for new investors because they ran out of money. That's not in the interest of anybody. It's not in the interest of the owners, not the interest of the supporters, more importantly. It's not the interest of the players. So creating an ecosystem that is sustainable is in the interest of the overall sport ecosystem. And I think having new investors or more investors with an institutional mindset coming in is only going to be positive for the sports industry.
Fascinating. Well, it looks like, Jamie, we are coming up on your time limit. So Massimo, thank you so much for joining us. We always have a final question that we ask all of our guests. I'm going to be very interested to hear your response to this. So we are going to wave a wand, and we are going to make you the emperor of the world for one day. You can't kill anyone, and you can't put anyone in a camp, but you can incept ideas in people. And so during your one day of incepting the worldwide population, everyone's going to wake up thinking, oh, I just had this great idea. What you got for me?
My great idea would be to make sure that everybody recognizes the sustainability of sports industry, sports sector is going to be key, and therefore find a way to make sure that there is not too much leakage into that sports sector. I think there is, a lot of people talk about increasing revenues in sports. Clubs wanting to find ways to generate more revenues. But the question is not just about generating more revenues. We do want to generate more revenues. Everybody wants to, but make sure that those revenues are properly spent for the growth of the sports, the franchise, the youth system, generating a new generation of players or supporters. That's the goal of sports. We can be professional investors or business investor, but at the end of the day, we should not lose sight of what sports is about.
So I'm translating that as we would incept in everyone the understanding of how character building and great sports can be for children coming up, and we want to make sure that that's sustainable. Well, this has been great. And you know what, Jamie, since you can't answer this, I'm going to give a second one to Massimo, and I'm going to tell Jamie's father that you came up with this. And that is, you're going to incept everyone in the world to wake up thinking, you know what? I think putting Jonathan Catherwood on the board of Leeds United would be a good idea.
That was my dad's submitted question is, when does he get his board seat?
I could have said, when is Leeds United going to win the Champions League? But I think that would have been too easy.
Yeah. Thank you so much. This is really fascinating. I just love the way these things are developing. You taught me a lot. I really appreciate it.
But thank you so much, Massimo, and best of luck, except against Tottenham this season.
That's a very gentlemanly thing to do. All right. Thank you very much. Cheers, everyone.